Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. This is episode number 3 of game week number 2 for the Penn State 2025 football season. As promised, we are back to break down this matchup from a Penn State perspective. Hopefully you caught our last episode of the podcast where we spent a lot of time with an FIU beat reporter learning more about the Panthers. They got off to a good start, a blowout win, but it was against an FCS opponent. They have 3 straight years of winning 4 games, haven't had a winning record since 2018, and obviously face a tall task against the number 2 team in the country. Penn State considered a 6-touchdown favorite for this matchup. We'll get into our score predictions a little bit later, our players to watch as well. We've got some commentary coming off the practice field. And to help me get through this entire show, let's bring in my colleagues from Lions247, Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan. You can catch this episode at the end of each game week as we start to narrow our focus down and put the spotlight on the matchup ahead of us, which, as we said, another non-conference showdown. And Mark, we've said for months now that we are aware we're not going to learn everything about this Penn State team and its national title contending readiness based off the first 3 weeks, but these should be stepping stones. They're going to be viewed as easy stepping stones across the country. But James Franklin, I think, has a lot that he evaluates in these matchups, quarters 1 through quarter 4. And it's going to be another important opportunity for players, the coaching staff, to fine-tune things. Obviously, you want to come away with a win, but there are layers to matchups like this.
Yeah, another big game for backup players to me. I mean, I think Penn State's going to be okay with its starters, getting out relatively early, maybe early in the second half. I'm not going to repeat everything we said earlier in the week, but, there are some key areas, red zone, explosive plays, running game more consistent. Over on defense, to me, is where they really need some of those younger players to step up and do a better job. And that's not necessarily being overly critical of some of those kids like Coleman and Kamaju. I think that's part of the natural growing pains, especially for the true freshmen. And that's why when you're fortunate enough to have a schedule like this, you better take advantage of it. So I'm anxious to see the things that I talked about earlier over on offense, how much better they are this week. And then the young players on defense, how much more dialed in are they? Are they not necessarily playing with their hair on fire? Are they not necessarily just going on pure adrenaline and pure athleticism? But have they taken those teaching points and gotten better from week 1 to week 2? I mentioned in my prediction, there's an old coaching axiom. You always make the most improvement from week 1 to week 2. That's not going to matter for Penn State's veterans. We know what they're all about. But for the young guys they're going to be depending on as backups, to me, this is a very integral part of the season.
Yeah. So we'll be paying attention for all 60 minutes. We know many of you may not for this game, and don't worry, we'll have you covered with our post-game analysis and snap counts, because for us, people who, cover down to the nitty-gritty of this team, the fourth quarter, when you're up by 40, is still pretty fascinating because it's a lot of new pieces out there. And obviously, Penn State's got to get to the point where they're up by 40 in the fourth quarter. And we'll break down some of the keys to this matchup in a moment. But Mark, before we go too far into the show, what's up?
What we were just texting before we got on this. What were we breaking down?
We were down to the 4th-string punt returner, I believe, on our special teams depth chart, and long snapper. So we have fun with this, and obviously it's a little bit helpful when you get as many players involved on the field in front of us as there were last Saturday. Our depth chart will be up at Lions247.com by the time you hear this episode, which is going to drop on a Friday. We're recording on a Thursday. And just to turn your attention to our last episode, in case you missed it, we had a beat reporter for FIU, Kevin Barral, came on, spent about 20 minutes with us. The strengths, the weaknesses. They got Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year in the preseason running things at quarterback. They've got a Conference USA first-team preseason player at cornerback. And then they have a lot of new pieces and a new coaching staff, and they're coming off a win over Bethune-Cookman. Again, a lot to learn about them. We have some commentary up from their head coach as well, Willie Simmons, where he talked about Drew Aller being a potential number 1 pick and preparing for that. He talked about Denai Dennis-Sutton being an All-American presence at defensive end for the Nittany Lions. And I thought it was interesting as well. They're trying to get their head around what Jim Knowles might try to do against them on Saturday. They spent a lot of time working through 2024 Ohio State film, and he said, when you're trying to find chinks in the armor, not the best to be looking at the defending national champions. There's not a lot to work through. So I think it'll be a big overmatch here in terms of Penn State versus FIU. But Mark, before we go too far on this podcast, we don't have the 75% offer anymore, but we still have a deal going on. And I just want to put it out there for folks who may have missed that opportunity going into the season, even though we were banging the drum a bunch on this podcast. Still got a great chance for you to jump in and enjoy everything we got from VIP coverage standpoint, team related, recruiting related, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's not 6% off as it was stated on somebody made a mistake on our front page. It's still 60% off. So very thankful. We were one of the network leaders in the 75% off promo. I'm not going to go overboard because we really pushed that. But if you're interested, still time to get on board, 60% off. Shout out to Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan for heading up all of our great recruiting coverage. The Lions Pride Board is now all VIP. I think that went really well week 1 of the season. So a lot of reasons to come on at the premium level, but we can only beat the drum so many times. So 60% off. If you're interested, give it a look. And one real cool thing is our retention on these is really, really, really high. So just so you know, I mean, we're up 80-90% of retention of people who come on these special deals. So it's worth your while to give it a look-see. And if you don't want to go for an annual plan, you can go full price monthly and quickly get Paramount Plus. So it would be a good deal for you.
Trust me, we don't want to spam you on these podcasts, but I figured we want to make sure you're aware there's a good opportunity to hop on board. We'll leave it at that. And Daniel, let's jump into this game week coverage and go back to the practice field where we were on Wednesday afternoon and into the evening. You've waited patiently to speak up on this episode. So Zariah Fisher is where we'll begin. James Franklin telling us that it is going to be good to go, it looks like, for this matchup on Saturday. He's talked about there was a lot of hope that he was going to be able to play in game 1, and Fisher was enthusiastic about playing, but they didn't feel like he had the practice reps under his belt. Wasn't going to be good for him, wasn't going to be good for the team, and so he stepped back. Franklin made note, probably going to be a limited snap count for Fisher, who hasn't played in a game since the 2023 Peach Bowl because of injury issues. But Daniel, this is going to be important because not only what do you see from Zariah Fisher in 15 to 20 snaps maybe this Saturday, but what could an opportunity to play this Saturday and next Saturday mean for him against Oregon later in September? I think when you talk to people within the program and you kind of take the pulse of where this team is at with Zariah Fisher at defensive end, it's all about making sure he's primed up for the Oregon matchup. And I think this is a part of that process.
You look at what James Franklin said on Wednesday night about Fisher. I think I have it written down. He said, only play him a limited amount. And I think the wording he used was ease him in. So we'll see how much Zariah Fisher that we'll see out there. I know if you're expecting to see, a ton of him, you probably won't. And I think that makes a lot of sense with who Penn State is playing and what is looming later on this year. But I think having him out there, it'll be a good way for us to see what this defensive end rotation looks like in terms of Fisher, Denai Sutton, how much Jalen Harvey rotates in, how much Chaz Coleman rotates in. Are those the first 2 guys up in terms of that rotation? I think we'll get a little bit more of a glimpse at the depth chart, how this is shaking out with Zariah Fisher. And then the other part of it is all right, how's he look? He's someone that we've talked a lot about, just by virtue of being a 6th-year guy, being a lot older, you want to see a lot more physical development. I think James Franklin made a reference to the FIU line being bigger than what they saw last week from Nevada. So what does Fisher look like stacked up against maybe some more physically imposing players? I think we'll get a good idea early on of what Zariah Fisher could be about this season, even if we don't see him for super long amount of time.
He was a pretty disruptive pass rusher when he got his opportunities in 2023 as a rotational piece. I think he ended up with right around the same amount of sacks as Chop Robinson, with about 80 to 100 fewer snaps on the season. His high in snaps that year was the Peach Bowl. It went over 40 snaps with Chop Robinson and Adiza Isaac watching much of that game. Mark, we're getting more defensive reinforcements, though, on the field this Saturday. Not just Zariah Fisher back in the fold at defensive end, but Zion Tracy getting back into the defensive backfield. He was listed as questionable before last game. We saw him warm up in uniform. He did not go onto the field once that game started. That meant Kenny Wosley made his first start as a redshirt freshman at the nickel position. Colin Dinkins got involved there, the redshirt junior at safety. But this has been Zion Tracy's position, really, when you talk to people throughout the year. He wasn't always available on the field, a little bit this summer and then certainly in the spring. But every time you checked in, it was Zion Tracy's going to be the nickel. Zion Tracy's going to be playing that slot coverage. And so we expect him to reascend back to the top of that conversation. But Franklin says Kenny Wosley will remain in that mix. And I think Colin Dinkins will too. But Mark, Zion Tracy was a player who was really on the ascent last season. He kind of ripped away that primary job from Cam Miller by midseason, took that through the postseason, had a tremendous read and react pick six against Ohio State that put them up 10-0 early in that game last year. And overall, he seems to be someone who has put together a lot of pieces in Jim Knowles' system when available. And so I think this is a guy we all need to circle as has a high ceiling for this team defensively. And we'll start to get our first look on Saturday.
He's probably why Cam Miller's at Rutgers, right? I mean, that's right. That's the way that kind of played out. But I think they're going to do the same thing with him, I would guess, as with Zariah. Absolutely no reason to play him a ton of snaps. If there's any concern whatsoever, ease him in. You hit on it, Tyler. This is a key position in Jim Knowles' defense. This is the reason they're going from the traditional defensive set to more of a 4-2-5 because they have that depth. And they have a guy like Zion who can do so many things. So I think does nothing but help them. Get him in there for a few series. And we saw with Wosley and we saw with Colin Dinkins. Colin Dinkins had some struggles maybe late in the game, but get those out of the way now and continue to build that depth. I think it's going to be very similar to what you see from Zariah Fisher.
Daniel, what do you make of, again, we don't know how much we'll see of these two players, but Zariah Fisher and Zion Tracy are two that we've had penciled in and really in ink, to be honest with you, by the time we got into deeper into the summer as starters at their respective positions. We don't know quite what they'll look like yet with 30-plus snaps maybe, but what do you make of this being a step forward for Jim Knowles, for this defense? And let's be honest, we don't quite know what we've seen out of that playbook, and we still don't know what we're going to see when that's a 40-point favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it for us is just getting the clearer picture of what Penn State has, what they're dealing with as we get into that Oregon game. I know that we keep talking about it over and over, and obviously 1-0, no disrespect to the opponents who are on the schedule, but so much of this ramp up with Nevada, FIU, Villanova is really geared towards having everything clicking by the time Oregon comes to town for the whiteout. So I think a big thing that comes along with that is, what does this look like when you have a full deck? What does the operation look like? Even just beyond having these players, having them out there and healthy, it's how do they look with the communication, all of those different things. I think when you combine all of that together, you want to see these guys out here, even if it is, a very limited amount of time. There's always something to learn, always something to glean from putting all your pieces together at once.
Everything we saw on the practice field on Wednesday indicated that Ethan Grunkemeyer is well situated to remain QB2. Jackson Smolik was running with the scout team. There was a lot of good things said about Ethan Grunkemeyer earlier this week by James Franklin. Daniel Gallen had a story up at Lions247 this week. Mark, what are you going to be looking for from Grunkemeyer in his second appearance? We're not sure when that will happen, but again, dictated by game flow, there should be a few series for him to get out there. And we heard from Ethan Grunkemeyer this week for the first time since he got that action. And sounds like a guy who maybe a weight was lifted off his shoulders a little bit in terms of getting the chance to go out there and run things on an offense. He was very proud of that 94-yard drive that resulted in a touchdown, his touchdown run. But what will you be looking for from number 17 when he gets his next chance?
More the same. I mean, just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, that's what they need out of him, is to go in there and get reps and march that team down the field and do what you need to do. James Franklin said he actually played better in the game than he had been playing in practices. So hopefully that translated into practice where you're probably playing against some better defenders. But no, just keep doing what he's doing. He didn't make mistakes. I thought he did a really nice job going back and rewatching the game of kind of being the general out there, running when he needed to run, passing when he needed to pass, finding different receivers. So I think it's just more the same. Just keep doing that in these first 3 games. So if something happens to Aller, he's ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, he's already feels far more seasoned than he did, 7 days ago, just getting a little action against a different opponent, and he'll stack on top of that this upcoming Saturday. A lot more from our practice coverage over at Lions247.com. Daniel had you covered with an offensive notebook. I did a defensive notebook. Grace Brennan had a full photo gallery. Mark Brennan had highlights, more than 3 minutes of video from the field. So everything over at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers, plus the entire post-practice press conference with James Franklin. When we look toward this matchup and Penn State storylines, I think the one thing that everyone would feel a lot better about with Penn State and where their trajectory is here in 2025 is kind of a get-right game for the offensive line and the rush attack. And so, Daniel, when we put our spotlight on that area of the field and that area of the offense, what stands out to you, and how important is it for Penn State to show more of a pulse, more of an authority in that regard in its second quote unquote cupcake non-conference matchup?
I mean, I think when you look at the running backs and in terms of what you want to see, what you need to see, I think Kaytron Allen looked really good in week 1. I think that it was only 8 carries, but I think that he picked up where he left off at the end of last year. James Franklin has talked a lot about him having the healthy offseason, not working through something or not working on coming back from something in the offseason, but really being able to work towards something for him. And I think that we saw that a little bit out there. I think Nick Singleton, you still see that guy when he touches the ball. You can imagine him ending up 80 yards down the field every time he has it. So I think that those players individually, you really see positive things. But I do agree that the whole operation, I think you want to see a little bit more cohesiveness. I think another, you talk about bringing back all these different starters, and you say that, Anthony Donka and Nolan Rucci are returning starters, but they never actually started alongside each other before. So I think that there's some chemistry stuff that probably needs to get ironed out. Obviously, we know the type of defenders that they're going up against in practice, but it's different when you're doing it in a game. In that type of setting. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of eyes on this running game, and I think a lot of people would go to sleep better on Saturday night if there is a very solid performance. Maybe if they break off some of those big runs that we've been forecasting for so many non-conference games now, going back a couple of years. But I'll have my eyes on this O-line, on this running game. But I think that you would hope that this is the type of game where the talent can really win out and they can really exert themselves.
Just going back to Kaytron Allen very quickly, only 8 carries, like you said, but made the most of them, about 5.5 yards per carry. When you go back to the end of last season now, he's over 5.3 yards per carry in 4 of 5 matchups. That includes 3 games in the postseason. His lowest average during this 4-game span is 4.3 yards. But you guys remember, we were talking about Kaytron Allen in a very different light on this podcast before like late November, December last year. Prior to this 4-game span, he was under a 5-yard average in 7 of 8 games last season. He was under a 4-yard average in 6 of those 8 games. I know I'm throwing you a lot of numbers, but he was very pedestrian last September, October. Then he was a monster in the postseason. Everything we've heard is he's going to build upon that. And we got the monster version, at least in terms of the traits and what we saw with limited sample size on Saturday. And so that's a great thing with Allen. I think Nick Singleton continues to pop as a receiver. I think that's very apparent every time. 6 yards was his longest run. So there's not much commentary on what we saw from him as a runner last week, 2 1-yard touchdown runs. But I think it's more of an offensive line conversation, right, Mark? I mean, you talk about Anthony Donko and Nolan Rucci. I mentioned this to Donko yesterday after practice, and he says that their trust is in a good place, their relationship's in a great place, but he also acknowledged, playing a few quarters of football against a live opponent in that kind of a setting, that's going to do them some favors. He indicated that all the stuff they need to work on was more related to technique, was more related to communication. He doesn't think that it was anything that's going to have carryover effects. It was addressable, was the term that he used. And so ultimately they got to go out and prove it. I've noticed some people on our message board raising red flags about the offensive line. I'm not anywhere near there. I still think this can be one of the best in the country. And I think that, when you're moving around 7 players and purposely trying to get 7 guys starters reps, and then in a game you're working in other dudes last week, there's some room for confusion. There's some room for a little bit of discombobulation. And I think you just want to see maybe a sharper execution from that front 5, regardless of who those 5 are over the course of this game.
Yeah, that said, I'm pumping the brakes on the 94 comparisons that I made. That team wasn't giving up a sack to Nevada. That team wasn't being held to the longest rush of the day by a running back 11 yards against an opponent like Nevada. So I'm with you, Tyler. Mm-hmm. It's too early to panic. Way too early. But I think some of the comparisons I was making and other people were making were a little premature. So I do think it's important for them to go out, and I'll get to this a little bit later in my bold prediction. But those explosive plays, you could say it's about the quarterback, you could say it's about the receivers, but it's about that offensive line too. So it has to take care of business. And, in that game at times, I just wonder if, I think it was the first series where they went with that set where they had 7 offensive linemen. And it's like, do you need to be doing that on the first series of the year? It's fun. I'm up in the press box. Everybody's like, oh, look, Cooper Cousins at fullback and you have 2 offensive linemen split wide. That's all great. But how about you establish the running game against an overmatched opponent first and then start messing with that stuff like in the, third quarter or something. So I do think they have to prove some things.
Yeah, well, we'll get a look at them, and I think one way or the other, if they don't come out of this game and don't take a step forward, then we'll have a bit of a different conversation probably, and then you've got Villanova around the corner and all that. But again, this offensive line, they have the pieces. I think they're just still figuring out how to sort them together, and if that comes together this week, could be big numbers. If it doesn't, then we'll be talking about it on the post-game podcast. Daniel, anything to kind of add on this subject? Because it's probably been the number one, I don't want to say negative, but it's been like the least positive discussion point after a 35-point opening win. That I think the feedback we've gotten on the message board, maybe people hitting you up randomly on social media, is like, where's this Joe Moore contending offensive line? And again, I'm just like, okay, 60 minutes of football. Let's see what they look like next week. But I understand when there's been a lot of conversation from these guys, from the program, that this could be the best offensive line in America. And when you don't come out and look exactly like that right away, people might scratch their heads. People might say, well, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural reaction. If you're a fan and you've been reading, what we've been writing and listening to us, and you come out and see that type of performance, it's the type of thing where a lot of people were citing the yards per carry number. I mean, I think that you take those with a grain of salt sometimes. I know that there's a lot more that goes into it, but like Nick Singleton had 2 1-yard touchdowns. Like that hurts your average, but I think you'll take a 1-yard touchdown run over a lot of different plays.
Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, that's just one example of of how you can look at the numbers differently. But I mean, let's talk after Villanova.
Yeah,
we know there's a little bit of history there with the running game and what that could portend for the future. But I think that I'm going to need the whole 3-game sample size before I really feel any type of way about this aspect of the game.
Yeah, and we've only got about a 3/4 sample size, if that, on the primary offensive line. So stay tuned for more on that. And just something else to watch in the run game. Quentin Martin Jr. Seems to be trending towards his season debut. We know he's going to be a special teams piece, but also in the mix for the RB3 job. Cam Wallace made a nice opening statement last Saturday. Corey Smith was involved, didn't do a ton with his work, but we think Quentin Martin will get a chance to maybe go out and flex some of his skill set. A bit of a different receiver, a bit of a different running backs we talked about with some of those receiving skills. When we get over to the young edge rushers, that's been a primary topic of conversation all week long. We've already said Zariah Fisher's back, but don't expect to see a ton of him. There are 4 freshman eligible players, Mark, that were out there for significant run in the season opener. Malachi Williams and Jalen Harvey, who got the start, year 2 guys, redshirt freshmen, and then the 2 true freshmen, Yvonne Kamaju and Chaz Coleman. What do you think is the most important thing for Penn State with these 4 guys through non-conference play, trying to set the stage for Big Ten? Is it getting them a bunch of reps regardless of where they have it figured out? Or is it trying to figure out maybe one or two or three of these four guys, you need to load them up and you start to narrow focus with some of this group?
Well, I think when they talk about Zariah Fisher being limited, that's also because they need to get these guys reps, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you get all of them as many reps as you possibly can. Balance them out. I mean, obviously you can't get all of them, all of the reps, but yeah, you want to find out who kind of rises to the top. I mentioned it earlier. Coleman and Kamaju, I mean, the athleticism is just like, whoa, that's unbelievable. And that's not to discount Williams and Harvey, but I think those guys are like a little bit different level. And if you can harness that, I mean, that is going to be fun to watch. And that's why I mentioned it earlier. I think these three games are huge. But, yeah, I think you got to mix and match all these guys and try to balance it out. And at least this week, and then maybe next week you start to dial it down a little bit. And then during the bye week, you start making decisions on who's going to play and maybe who's not. So, yeah, I think these next two games are important. But for the time being, I want to see as much of all of them as we possibly can.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that it's a long leash for the young pups this week, and then maybe you start to whittle it down a little bit and see who's really ready for prime time, getting deeper into September. Daniel, I think one area we didn't learn a ton about in terms of unknown pieces was linebacker. I think we liked what we saw about Amari Campbell. You had a great piece up last weekend on his debut, but it was a lot of Amari Campbell and Tony Rojas, and sometimes DeLuca was in tandem with those guys. And then Keon Wiley was the fourth linebacker who got a lot of run. Anthony Specca was around 10 snaps. Dakari Nelson might have gotten one snap. We didn't see guys like Kari Jackson or freshman Alex Tash or LeVar Arrington the second. And so to me, I don't know about you, this is one that I hope we get to peel back the curtain a little bit more deeper into the matchup Saturday, because Jim Knowles didn't sound all that comfortable in preseason camp with his linebacker depth and didn't seem all that comfortable in the way they utilized players on Saturday.
Definitely. I think what he told you guys, I wasn't in on the scrum, but he mentioned the top three linebackers and then needing to see everyone else. I think that really bore itself out with Wiley maybe separating himself into his own tier. As that fourth guy who could mix in with that top group. I do think with having, leaning on that top group and not really seeing much of the younger guys in that game. Linebacker is a game where the communication is so important. You've got Campbell out there with the green dot, relaying the calls from Jim Knowles. This is his first time doing that at Beaver Stadium at home with that many people being that loud. So I kind of looked at it as, okay, you're going to need those linebackers out there, mix and match them a little bit, get that communication going. Communication was something that we heard from James Franklin on Wednesday evening, a little bit more in terms of the secondary as something that they want to see steps forward on. So I think I looked at that short rotation as, all right, these are our top guys. They need to be comfortable with each other. And then I think I agree. Maybe we can see them dip a little bit deeper down the depth chart, see what they have in terms of other guys. But I came away, impressed with what I saw from Amari Campbell, liked what I saw from Tony Rojas early. So I'm excited to see how that top group, they can build on it. And then if Keon Wiley can maybe be a little bit more of a factor.
I like the trust they're showing in Keon Wiley. What it shows a lot what he's done on the practice field this year. A guy that we haven't seen in game action, going back to 2023 until this last Saturday. Going to be an important piece. We talked about maybe his edge rushing prowess, having a presence in some obvious passing down situations for this defense as the season moves along. Anthony Specca is a guy, though. I feel like I said this a lot last year in some of these blowout games. Would love to see a little bit more of him maybe this week, getting some more run, getting a chance to maybe run and dictate things on defense if the opportunity allows for it. I wanted to finish off this discussion before we get to our players to watch, Mark, by mentioning just on first glance, it seems like the special teams unit is going to be more dangerous from a return standpoint. We obviously saw King Mack do what he did against Nevada, a 73-yard return. He did fantastic things with the ball in his hands as a top 100 recruit down in South Florida. We wondered if that was going to emerge at the college level. You got Nick Singleton back there deep. We've seen him do it in the past. It's been a couple years since he took one all the way back. But punt returner seems like it's a major upgrade. You've got Devontae Ross and Trevor Pena have successful track records as return men at their old schools. Then you got Zion Tracy now back in the mix. He showed some things last year, but I felt like the last couple seasons, whether it was Zion Tracy or Caden Saunders for an extended period, it was more about not making a mistake at punt returner, not losing extra yardage, not fumbling the ball. Now it's, can you get us a spark? And they maybe have some solutions there.
Pena, it was hard where we were at when Pena was fielding those punts. It was like 700 yards away. So when you go back and watch it on TV, he was fearless back there. I mean, that was really cool to see. I think he's going to be a weapon. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be the guy they settle on because they have so many people back there and he's so valuable to the passing game. But I'm thinking, wow, it's been a minute since we've seen somebody who's confident enough to do that and then kind of has that escapability. So he's the guy who kind of stood out to me. And then, I mentioned it earlier in the week. I would just have King Mack back there returning kickoffs. I don't think you need Nick Singleton back there. I don't think you need to subject him to that. I think you have enough weapons, but it should be fun. I think it's not going to be my bold prediction this week, but sooner or later, I'm gonna say Pena is going to pop one of those babies for a touchdown because he just looks what do they call it in baseball, like runnerish, or I don't know what it is, but there's something about him that he just, whatever it is, he has it out there as a punt returner.
And that's a sneaky dynamic of championship contending squads, is when you can bridge from a really strong defense to your offense with a capable punt returner who can set you up even better. Because this defense is going to push a lot of teams back. They're going to set up good field position. You get a return for 10 yards instead of no return. All of a sudden, you're maybe starting in enemy territory with your drives. A lot to monitor there because there's a few guys in the mix, and I think there's still kind of a competition going on. Let's talk about a few more players because we've got our players to watch here to start to close out the episode. And Mark, we're going right back to you. Where does your spotlight land for Penn State?
Yeah, I'm going back to where we kind of started today. Zariah Fisher. I mean, I don't know that he's going to have a big game, but I think it's important for Penn State for him to come out and play well. And when he's out there, to look like the Zariah Fisher we saw a couple of years ago, if not even better. All these young defensive ends are great, but having another veteran presence out there opposite Dennis Sutton, I think, is vital for this team. So however long Zariah Fisher plays, I'm going to be focused in on him and seeing how he's doing. And I think it's really important that he plays well. He won't have big numbers because he's not going to play the whole game, but I think just playing well is going to be a good sign for this defense moving forward.
Daniel, who is your player to watch?
I'm going to go in a similar vein as Mark with Zion Tracy. Given how we saw them use the nickel in week one, that's pretty much going to be a full-time position, it feels like, as opposed to how it's been the past couple of years for Penn State. So if you're going to be the nickel, you're going to be out there a lot, and you're going to have to do a lot of different things. I think Zion Tracy is very capable of not only doing those things, but excelling at them and making plays. So I think that this will be a good look to see how comfortable he is. Are they doing anything different with him than they did with Kenny Woosley last week? All those sorts of things.
We're not going to be in position to be selecting backup linemen for this much longer, but we're still in the portion of the schedule where it makes sense. So I'm going to go Egan Boyer here. I saw him absolutely pancake, like bury Jalen Harvey, who started the last game on a rep one-on-one action yesterday. And we double check with James Franklin, like, okay, where's Egan Boyer? Because he was in a sling this spring, during the blue-white game, he's standing there on the sideline. This summer, it's been hard to get a read on where he is in his progress. He was out for the season opener. He was listed as out before the Nevada game. Franklin says he's going to be able to go, that he's going to be cleared to play this week. And so if we get a chance to see him out there, I think he could supplant Owen Alasine as the second left tackle involved behind Drew Shelton. And if the score goes away we think it should, that could mean a quarter of work or more for Egan Boyer. He's a guy who is 60-plus pounds heavier than when he got to campus in January of 2024, 60-plus pounds heavier. He's already like the most athletic offensive lineman that a lot of people have seen. And apparently this weight gain hasn't shut that down. He's still moving fluidly. And additionally, the power that he presents is just at a different level. And we saw that on display a little bit. He's a different physical beast right now, at 6'8", 200 or 305 pounds than he was even last season. I think right around 280 or 285. And so I think he has a chance to be the left tackle of the future for Penn State. Owen Alasine is going to have something to say about that. Malachi Goodman might have something to say about that. But he's someone that people in the building think could come out the other end of his process here on the college campus as a first-round NFL draft talent. So I want to watch closely. If he's getting 15 to 20 or more snaps, I'd like to pay attention to a lot of them with my binoculars because he's kind of a tantalizing figure on this roster, and we just haven't had a lot of looks at him. Prediction time now, guys. Daniel, we're going to go to you. Give us your score prediction for Penn State versus FIU, along with your bold prediction.
Once again, I'll start with the score prediction because I don't think there's going to be much drama. I have Penn State 59, FIU 14. I think we're going to see Penn State lean on that running game a little bit. I think you saw how deliberate they were last week with getting Kyron Hudson and Trevor Pena the ball early. I think that we'll see a similar approach this time, but with the run game. I can see them, each one of these games, these non-con games coming out, focusing on a different area. And I think that'll be the running game. As for my bold prediction, I'm going defense. Someone I mentioned earlier, Keon Wiley. On Monday, James Franklin said that Wiley needs to, quote, let it rip out there on the field, that sometimes he's doing too much thinking and trying to be right as opposed to just making the play. So I think we're going to get 2 sacks from Keon Wiley, something we know he's very adept at, and a forced fumble against FIU.
For the record, we're working off a 41-point spread for these predictions. And also for the record, you're talking to 3 experts over here who went 0-1 versus the spread in game number 1. It was a 44-point spread for Penn State. They won by 35. Mark, do you have them covering this time? And where are you with your bold prediction?
51-6. I think this is going to be more of a game where Penn State is being measured against Penn State in week 1 than against the opponent out there on the field. With all due respect to FIU, I mean, it's a team that's going to be kind of in over its head a little bit, I would say. And then, in terms of bold predictions, this will kind of go along with my overall pick. James Franklin, after every game, he talks about who won the explosive play battle. And, clearly that's a metric for him and a lot of coaches that is really, really important in determining whether you're winning or losing games. So I don't think it's lost on him or the rest of the staff that those plays were limited against Nevada. So longest play from scrimmage last week, 31-yard touchdown from Aller to Hudson. I think Penn State has at least 4 plays that are longer than 31 yards in this game as they look to one game. I don't think it's like some of the things we're talking about. One game, I don't think it's a red flag. But if we don't see more explosive plays against a lesser opponent in this game, I think it will be a red flag. But I do think we're going to see them. And that could be some combination of running. These are plays from scrimmage, not special teams. Some combination of running and passing. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but 4 of them are going to go longer than 31 yards.
All right. I've got Penn State winning this one 45-10 for the final score. I just don't see FIU doing what it wants to do on the ground to be able to give its quarterback, who is talented, an opportunity to go out there and actually deal against this defense. They've got a trio of running backs that they seem pretty high on. I know they had a big game on the ground against an FCS team last Saturday, but Zane Durant wasn't on that FCS team. Neither was Denai Dennis Sutton and everybody else they got on this defense. So I think that's going to be a pretty stark contrast as Penn State is going to have some offensive balance. I just don't see Nevada getting there over the course of the game. And for me, I think the bold prediction, I'm going back to those young defensive ends. I think we'll start to see more sparks from that group. Last week wasn't much on the stat sheet. I think this week, my bold prediction, multiple sacks between those 4 freshman eligible defensive ends. Maybe one of them gets both of them on his own, but I think they do some things in the backfield. They give you a little bit more indication of game readiness for Big Ten play. And again, a 35-point victory for Penn State. So we're all on board for another blowout, and that would send them into Villanova week at 2-0. We'll all be back in the press box at Beaver Stadium this Saturday early. It is a noon kickoff, so we'll be checking in early in the morning. We'll have plenty of pregame notes for you. We'll have our availability report based on who's going to be out, questionable, and all that. And we'll give you plenty of context from pregame warmups as we get our binoculars out and our running thread over on the message board for VIP subscribers at Lions247. Daniel, Mark, I'll see you both soon. Thanks as always for helping us set the stage for another matchup.
Thanks, Tyler.
And let me say one last thing, Tyler. Yeah. Appreciate the job you do on the podcast. I know sometimes I go kicking and screaming, to be honest, because I'm sometimes focused on other stuff, but I get a lot of positive feedback. I know a lot of work goes into it. We actually have a couple people family who stays in our house here in a different area of our house for football weekends, Rocky and Megan. And every time they come, they talk about how they listen to the pod on the drive up from Philly. So your work is appreciated, sometimes even though it may not come across that way from some of us. But a lot of people out there listen, and the ability to listen to the pod driving in for a game is a really cool thing. I would note that. I know a lot of people do that, and they appreciate your work as well.
I appreciate that. I'm only as good as my teammates. I got some good ones here at Lions247. We'll get back to you with a post-game podcast after the matchup from Beaver Stadium on Saturday. Between now and then, enjoy yourself, enjoy the pregame, and we'll talk to you real soon right here on Lions247.com.